Mexican versus Spanish. Who really shaped Mexico? What if everything you've ever been told about Mexico is only half the story? When most people think of Mexico, they immediately picture Spanish words, Catholic churches, colonial buildings, and family names like Garcia, Hernandez, or Rodriguez. It seems obvious that Spain shaped Mexico. After all, the Spanish conquered the land more than 500 years ago. They ruled it for nearly 3 centuries, introduced their language, spread Christianity, and changed the political system forever. But then another question appears. If Spain completely shaped Mexico, why do millions of Mexicans still carry indigenous DNA? Why does the Mexican flag feature an eagle standing on a cactus, a symbol that existed long before the Spanish arrived? Why are foods like corn, beans, chili peppers, tomatoes, and chocolate still at the center of Mexican life, even though they all existed thousands of years before Europe ever knew this continent existed? And why do millions of people across Mexico still celebrate traditions that began long before the first Spanish ship reached the American coast? The truth is much more complicated than most people realize. Modern Mexico wasn't created by one civilization replacing another. It was created when 2 completely different worlds collided. One was home to some of the most advanced civilizations in the Americas. The other was one of Europe's fastest-growing empires. Their meeting changed history forever. To understand who really shaped Mexico, we have to travel back more than 500 years. To a time before Spanish churches, before colonial cities, before the name Mexico even existed. Long before Europeans crossed the Atlantic Ocean, this land was already alive with civilization. People often imagine ancient America as a place filled with scattered tribes living simple lives. But that image couldn't be further from reality. Across central and southern Mexico, powerful societies had already been rising and falling for thousands of years. The Olmecs built enormous stone monuments that still puzzle archaeologists today. The Maya developed one of the world's most sophisticated writing systems, created complex mathematical formulas, and observed the stars with astonishing accuracy. The Zapotecs and Mixtecs built cities, established governments, and created beautiful works of art that survive even today. Generation after generation, these civilizations shared ideas, traded goods, improved farming techniques, and expanded their knowledge. This wasn't an empty land waiting to be discovered. It was already one of the world's great cultural centers. Then, around the 13th century, another group entered the Valley of Mexico. They called themselves the Mexica. According to their legends, they had wandered for years, searching for a place chosen by their god. The sign would be unmistakable. An eagle standing proudly on top of a cactus while holding a snake. Eventually, they found that exact image on a small island surrounded by the waters of Lake Texcoco. Most people would have looked at that swampy island and walked away. The Mexica saw opportunity. They began building a city. Not just any city, one that would become one of the greatest urban centers on Earth. Its name was Tenochtitlan. Building a city in the middle of a lake sounded impossible. But impossible quickly became reality. The Mexica constructed causeways connecting the island to the mainland. They dug canals that served as streets. They designed aqueducts that carried fresh water into the city. Most impressively, they created floating gardens called chinampas. These artificial islands produced enormous amounts of food throughout the year: corn, beans, squash, tomatoes, flowers. Everything the growing city needed. Because of this remarkable farming system, Tenochtitlan could support an enormous population. By the early 16th century, more than 200,000 people may have lived there. At the same time, many of Europe's greatest cities were actually smaller. Imagine approaching Tenochtitlan for the very first time. Massive temples rose high into the sky. Hundreds of canoes filled the canals. Bustling marketplaces attracted merchants from every corner of the empire. The smell of fresh food filled the air. Gold jewelry sparkled beneath the sunlight. Thousands of people moved through organized streets with incredible efficiency. Spanish soldiers later admitted they had never imagined such a city could exist in the Americas. Some believed they were looking at a dream. Others compared it to the greatest cities in Europe. But beauty wasn't the only reason Tenochtitlan became famous. It was also the capital of a powerful empire. Through warfare, diplomacy, and political alliances, the Aztecs expanded their influence across much of central Mexico. Dozens of neighboring cities paid tribute. Food, precious stones, cotton, weapons, luxury goods. Everything flowed into Tenochtitlan. The empire became incredibly wealthy. Its armies became stronger every year. Its ruler, Emperor Moctezuma II, controlled one of the most powerful states in the Americas. But every empire has one weakness. The more powerful it becomes, the more enemies it creates. Many neighboring peoples deeply resented Aztec rule. Heavy tribute demands placed enormous pressure on conquered communities. Military campaigns forced young men into constant warfare. Some prisoners captured during battles became part of religious ceremonies that terrified neighboring societies. Over time, resentment spread throughout the region. Entire communities quietly dreamed about breaking free from Aztec control. None of them knew that across the Atlantic Ocean, another ambitious civilization was preparing to change history forever. While the Aztecs dominated central Mexico, Spain was entering a new age. In 1492, after centuries of conflict, the Christian kingdoms united under Ferdinand and Isabella. That same year, Christopher Columbus crossed the Atlantic. Although he never reached mainland Mexico, his voyages opened the door for countless expeditions that followed. Stories of unimaginable wealth soon spread throughout Spain. Explorers spoke about lands rich in gold and silver. Young adventurers dreamed of becoming famous. Among them was Hernán Cortés. Unlike many noblemen, Cortés wasn't born into extraordinary wealth. He wanted success. He wanted power. Most of all, he wanted opportunity. When he heard rumors about wealthy civilizations deep inside the mainland, he decided to investigate. In 1519, Cortés sailed from Cuba with around 600 soldiers. By modern military standards, it was an incredibly small expedition. A few horses, some cannons, steel swords, crossbows, primitive firearms, against an empire numbering millions of people. Victory seemed impossible. Yet Cortés understood something that would change everything. Wars are not won by weapons alone. They are won through alliances. As his expedition moved inland, Cortés quickly discovered that many indigenous nations hated Aztec rule. Some had been conquered decades earlier. Others paid crushing tribute every year. Many wanted revenge. Instead of fighting these communities, Cortés negotiated with them. One by one, local rulers agreed to become his allies. Thousands of indigenous warriors joined the expedition, then thousands more. Eventually, the Spanish force became only a tiny fraction of the army, marching toward Tenochtitlan. This is one of history's greatest misconceptions. The conquest of Mexico was not simply a few hundred Spaniards defeating millions of indigenous people. It became a coalition made up mostly of indigenous allies, fighting against the Aztec Empire. Without those alliances, historians believe the conquest may never have succeeded. As the combined army marched closer to Tenochtitlan, reports reached Emperor Moctezuma. Messengers described pale-skinned strangers wearing shining metal armor, animals larger than deer carrying armed men on their backs, weapons that exploded with fire and thunder. No one had ever seen horses before. No one had heard gunpowder before. Everything about these newcomers seemed mysterious. Moctezuma faced an impossible decision. Should he attack immediately? Should he welcome them peacefully? Should he negotiate? Every option carried enormous danger. Historical accounts written by Spanish chroniclers claimed that Moctezuma believed Cortés might have fulfilled an ancient prophecy. Many modern historians question that interpretation, arguing there is little reliable indigenous evidence supporting the story. What historians do agree on is that Moctezuma chose diplomacy. When Cortés finally entered Tenochtitlan, one of history's most extraordinary meetings took place. Two civilizations, two languages, two religions, two completely different visions of the world. Standing face to face for the first time, for a brief moment, peace remained. The Spanish admired the city's beauty. The Aztecs observed the strangers with cautious curiosity. But beneath the surface, fear and suspicion continued to grow. Neither side fully trusted the other. Neither side truly understood the other's intentions. And within only a few months, that fragile peace would collapse. The city that had amazed the world, the empire that had ruled central Mexico for generations, and the civilization that believed itself nearly unstoppable, was about to face the greatest challenge in its history. Everything changed faster than anyone could have imagined. The peaceful meeting between Hernán Cortés and Emperor Moctezuma did not last. Suspicion grew on both sides. The Spanish feared they were surrounded by an empire far larger than anything they had expected. The Aztecs watched every movement of their unexpected guests, wondering whether they had come as diplomats, traders, or conquerors. Soon, a series of misunderstandings, political decisions, and violent confrontations pushed both civilizations toward a conflict neither could avoid. Cortés eventually placed Moctezuma under his control, hoping to rule the empire through its emperor. It was a risky strategy. While Moctezuma remained calm, anger spread throughout Tenochtitlan. Many Aztec nobles believed their ruler had surrendered too easily. Others demanded that the foreigners be expelled before it was too late. Then everything exploded. During an important religious festival, Spanish soldiers attacked a large gathering of Aztec nobles inside the city. Hundreds were killed. Whether the attack was driven by fear, misunderstanding, or a desire to prevent rebellion remains debated by historians, but its consequences were immediate. The city erupted. For the first time, the Aztecs launched a full-scale uprising against the Spanish. The streets of Tenochtitlan became battlefields, arrows filled the sky, stones rained from rooftops. The narrow causeways leading out of the city became deadly traps. The Spanish, along with their indigenous allies, were forced to flee during a desperate nighttime escape remembered today as La Noche Triste, the Night of Sorrows. Many Spanish soldiers drowned while trying to carry stolen gold across the canals. Others were captured and killed. What had seemed like a certain conquest suddenly looked like complete disaster. If history had ended there, the Aztec Empire might have survived. But history had another enemy waiting, an enemy that carried no sword, no shield, no army, smallpox. The disease arrived with Europeans, but the indigenous peoples of the Americas had never been exposed to it before. They had no natural immunity. Entire villages became infected within weeks. Families had disappeared. Communities collapsed. Farmers could no longer grow food. Warriors became too weak to fight. Even the empire's new emperor, Cuitlahuac, died from the disease only months after taking power. The epidemic spread faster than any army ever could. By the time Cortés returned to Tenochtitlan with thousands of indigenous allies, the city was already weakened by famine, disease, and political chaos. The final siege lasted for months. The Spanish blocked supplies entering the city. Their indigenous allies attacked from multiple directions, street by street, bridge by bridge, temple by temple. The once magnificent capital slowly fell apart. Finally, on August 13, 1521, Tenochtitlan surrendered. One of the greatest cities in the world had fallen. For many people, this moment marks the birth of Spanish Mexico, but in reality, it marked the beginning of something far more complex. Spain did not simply replace one civilization with another. Instead, it began building an entirely new society on top of the old one. The ruins of Tenochtitlan became the foundation for what is now Mexico City. Spanish churches rose where Aztec temples had once stood. European-style government replaced the Aztec imperial system. Catholic missionaries spread Christianity across the region, often building churches directly on sacred indigenous sites. The Spanish language became the language of government, trade, and education. Over time, it spread into nearly every corner of the country. Today, more than 98% of Mexicans speak Spanish. It remains one of Spain's greatest and most lasting influences, but language alone does not define a nation. As Spanish settlers arrived, another transformation began. People from Europe and indigenous communities started families together. Their children became known as mestizos. Over generations, this mixed ancestry became one of the defining characteristics of modern Mexico. Unlike many colonies where populations remained largely separate, New Spain gradually became a society where cultures blended together, Spanish traditions mixed with indigenous customs. European music combined with native rhythms, old recipes evolved into entirely new cuisines, religious beliefs merged in unexpected ways. Even today, many Mexican festivals combine Catholic traditions with ceremonies whose roots stretch back long before Christianity arrived. Take the famous Day of the Dead. Many people assume it is purely a Catholic holiday. In reality, it reflects both Catholic beliefs and much older indigenous traditions honoring ancestors. Neither culture completely replaced the other. Instead, they fused together. The same happened with food. Corn remained the foundation of everyday life, just as it had for thousands of years. Beans, chili peppers, tomatoes, chocolate, avocados, these foods were all indigenous contributions. The Spanish introduced cattle, pigs, sheep, wheat, rice, onions, garlic, sugar, cheese, and horses. Today, tacos filled with beef, tamales served with pork, or sweetbreads made from wheat represent a combination of both worlds. Mexican cuisine exists because these cultures met. Architecture tells the same story. Walk through cities like Puebla, Guanajuato, Oaxaca, or Mexico City. You'll see magnificent colonial cathedrals built by Spanish architects, but beneath many of those buildings lie the foundations of indigenous cities. Some churches even contain stones taken directly from ancient temples. The old world literally became part of the new one. Over the centuries, New Spain grew into one of the wealthiest colonies in the Spanish Empire. Silver mines produced enormous fortunes. Trade connected Mexico with Europe, Asia, and the rest of the Americas. Spanish influence reached every aspect of daily life, yet indigenous communities never disappeared. Despite disease, conquest, and colonization, millions survived. They continued speaking their languages, preserving their traditions, protecting their customs, passing their history from one generation to the next. Today, Mexico officially recognizes dozens of indigenous languages. Nahuatl, the language of the Aztecs, is still spoken by well over 1 million people. Maya languages continue to thrive across southern Mexico. Zapotec, Mixtec, Otomi, Totonac, and many others remain an important part of the country's identity. Then there is DNA. Modern genetic research tells a fascinating story. Most Mexicans are genetically mixed. Their ancestry usually includes both indigenous American and European roots, with smaller African ancestry in many regions due to the Atlantic slave trade during the colonial period. The proportions vary from family to family and from region to region. Northern Mexico often shows higher European ancestry. Southern Mexico generally has stronger indigenous ancestry, but across the country, the vast majority of people represent centuries of mixture rather than a single origin. This is why asking whether Mexico is Spanish or indigenous misses the point entirely. It is both. Modern Mexico exists because both civilizations shaped it. Without indigenous civilizations, there would be no Mexico. The country's original agriculture, ancient cities, traditional foods, medicinal knowledge, Place names, symbols, and much of its cultural identity were already here long before Spain arrived. Without Spain, modern Mexico would likely speak different languages, its legal system, alphabet, Catholic traditions, architecture, and many aspects of its national institutions would look completely different. Neither story alone explains modern Mexico. Only together do they make sense. Perhaps that's why Mexico remains one of the world's most unique countries. It isn't simply European. It isn't simply indigenous. It is the result of centuries of conflict, cooperation, adaptation, and survival. A nation born from tragedy, but strengthened through resilience. The question was never whether Spain shaped Mexico. It clearly did. The question was never whether indigenous civilizations shaped Mexico. They unquestionably did. The real answer lies somewhere in between. Spain gave Mexico a new language, a new religion, and a new political system. The indigenous peoples gave Mexico its foundation. Its ancient history, its foods, its symbols, its traditions, and much of its identity roam either one, and the Mexico we know today would not exist. Perhaps the greatest lesson of all is this. History is rarely black and white. Civilizations do not simply disappear overnight. They evolve, they adapt, they merge, and sometimes, from the collision of two completely different worlds, something entirely new is born. Modern Mexico is living proof of that. 500 years after the conquest, the debate continues. But every time, someone enjoys a taco, celebrates Dia de los Muertos, admires the Metropolitan Cathedral standing beside the ruins of the Templo Mayor, or watches the Mexican flag waving proudly with its ancient eagle symbol, they are witnessing the legacy of both civilizations at the same time. So who really shaped Mexico? The most honest answer is also the most fascinating. Both did, not separately, together. And that is what makes Mexico unlike any other nation on earth. So, who really shaped Mexico? Was it the Spanish conquistadors, who brought a new language, a new religion, and a new political system? Or was it the indigenous civilizations that had already built one of the most advanced societies in the Americas centuries before Europeans arrived? After exploring 500 years of history, one thing becomes clear. Modern Mexico cannot be explained by only one side of the story. Its streets speak Spanish, but its heart still beats with indigenous traditions. Its churches tell the story of Europe, while its pyramids remind the world of civilizations that existed long before Columbus ever crossed the Atlantic. Every taco, every Dia de los Muertos celebration, every mariachi song, every ancient ruin, and every colonial cathedral represents the meeting of two worlds. Neither civilization completely erased the other. Instead, they created something entirely new. That is the real story of Mexico. Not a story of one culture replacing another, but a story of survival, adaptation, and transformation. History is rarely as simple as heroes and villains. The truth is usually far more complicated and far more fascinating. So the next time someone asks, who really shaped Mexico, you'll know the answer. Both did. One gave Mexico its ancient roots. The other reshaped its future. Together, they created one of the richest, most diverse, and most influential cultures on Earth. And perhaps that's the greatest lesson history can teach us. Sometimes the most extraordinary civilizations aren't built by one people alone. They're born when different worlds collide. If you enjoyed this documentary and learned something new, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and let us know in the comments. Do you think Mexico would be the same country today if the Spanish had never arrived? Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next documentary.